So hi, I'm Kim, I'm an MS reporter. I've had MS since 2011, I've got relapsing remitting MS. So we're here today at Guy's Hospital and we're going to go and chat to Dr. Katrin Hulme, who is a health psychologist here. She's going to share a bit about the work that she's doing in terms of talking about kind of the effect that the mind and the body can have on each other and the impact that things like stress can have on us, but also how we go about managing that and managing the uncertainty that comes with living with a long-term condition like ours. So I guess the first question is generally kind of what is health psychology, which is what you do, and also how you kind of got into it or what maybe inspired you to get into this sector.
So health psychology, I guess, is a kind of a mixture between psychology and medicine. It's that kind of mixture in between kind of the biological, the psychological and the social, and getting like the kind of the broader picture. And I mean, I guess you could kind of also call it kind of behavioural medicine. So how we act, how we think, how we feel, all impact on our kind of physical health. So it's kind of getting an understanding of what people are like as a whole body and as a whole person, as opposed to just kind of like the physical and the biomedical stuff that maybe we've learnt about in the past.
Okay, so shall we talk maybe a bit about what stress actually is in terms of how does it biologically happen in your body, why, and what does it actually look like when you've got it?
So it's actually really interesting in that stress itself obviously is a term that's kind of thrown around a lot, and it's got a really kind of bad press in a way. But actually stress is kind of just the body's reaction, and it's actually a kind of, we call it kind of adaptive, so a helpful thing in a way, because it's kind of getting you ready to face whichever challenge it is that's kind of you're facing. So if we kind of take it back into kind of history in terms of like the evolution and why it's kind of evolved, in terms of like if a threat happens, we kind of need to be ready to deal with it. And then there's the kind of the fight or flight kind of analogy, where you're basically by having that stress response, and basically your body, maybe like heart rate's going up, so there's more blood pumping around your body, your muscles are kind of getting more oxygen to them, they're ready, and so the stress hormone is called cortisol, and that also has kind of implications into, for example, getting glucose, so sugar basically in your body ready, immobilized, so your body has more energy to use, etc., etc. So it's essentially the stress response is actually an adaptive thing, it's a helpful thing, and it's the stressors in a way that are happening within kind of daily life maybe, and that can be anything from kind of exams through to kind of, in terms of long-term conditions, it might be kind of a doctor's appointment is coming up, or a surgery, for example, is coming up, and I mean, in the context of MS, we were saying that it might just be a case of uncertainty, for example, is a stressor, and adjusting to the long-term conditions. So it's stress itself I wouldn't say isn't necessarily a bad term. I think it's the way it's used insinuates obviously that it's not helpful, but it's kind of when the stress response lasts, and when you kind of, when it's that kind of perpetual state of tension and like a kind of anxiety, I guess, when the heartbeat is kind of increased, and if then there's the kind of knock-on effects, and maybe people aren't sleeping so well, or are particularly tired, or noticing a difference, maybe more snappy, for example, or struggling to kind of do things in their day-to-day lives as they used to be, and actually that's when kind of you kind of maybe have a think about whether the stresses that are around are actually maybe having more of an impact than is maybe healthy in a way.
How do you know at what point like it's no longer healthy? Because maybe you're slightly stressed and you're just going on being slightly stressed, and it's actually having an effect on you, but you don't realise necessarily, because you're not having like a panic attack, or you know, you maybe haven't been diagnosed with depression but you have anxiety, or you know, all those kind of things. At what point do you know that you need to seek help, basically?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think because it depends again on the kind of individual. I think people have different thresholds for kind of managing stress, or kind of the stresses in their environment, I should say.
I guess you talked about things like increased heart rate and kind of tension and being snappy. So like, I guess
Yeah, I think there's kind of the short term kind of where the body's getting ready, and that's the kind of increased heart rate, maybe sweating a little bit, and that in itself is the body just reacting. Whereas I think the kind of the longer term, and where the maybe functioning kind of it starts having an impact on daily life and maybe how you're feeling over a period of time, I think that's then the kind of it's the lasting nature of it. And as you said, obviously that there might be just this underlying stress that you maybe aren't aware of, and that's really difficult actually, because that kind of maybe then takes you to take a step back and just think, hang on, how kind of like basically again touching base, or kind of thinking, oh, how am I actually getting on with this, and it's uncomfortable, but maybe also kind of saying to yourself, oh, is everything okay? Because obviously it's easier sometimes just to push on and to kind of pretend things aren't there. So for example, kind of if symptoms or like medications or anything coming up that people are anxious about or feeling stressed about, is actually easy to kind of maybe push it aside and just to continue, whereas actually just to kind of think in the wider context, is there anything happening that's going on that I maybe need to pay attention to?
You know, you talk about kind of the short term and the long term. What are the long term kind of signs of stress, I guess?
Yeah, so I mentioned cortisol, the kind of the stress hormone, so that's also involved in things, as I said before, in terms of like glucose and kind of insulin, and how the body uses the energy and things like that. So that's also linked to kind of like weight gain around the middle, it can be. Then also maybe like I mentioned before, with the circadian rhythms and sleep patterns, the cortisol is actually involved. It's really quite cool actually. So when just before you wake up, just after you wake up, so in the waking up process, cortisol tends to spike, so it's basically getting your body ready for the day.
Yeah.
But if kind of cortisol is quite high and the stress, like there are lots of stressors and generally feeling stressed for quite a long time, that can kind of then cause the stress response to kind of dampen a little bit, because it's kind of firing all the time, so then it kind of stops in a way. And then actually people find that kind of, it's called the awakening response, doesn't happen as much. So actually people kind of maybe wake up feeling tired or drained already, maybe lacking energy throughout the day. So there's the kind of physical elements as well, and like in terms of the immune system, the cortisol. I mean, basically cortisol is involved in everything. Yeah, it's an amazing hormone, really. But in the kind of short term, cortisol has the kind of effect of dampening the immune system. So it kind of, your body won't. I mean, for an example, I know often when I was kind of younger at school, during exams, I wouldn't ever get ill, but then the holidays would come, and those first few days you kind of feel a bit fluey, etc. So the body's kind of letting you get through the stressor, and then it struggles a bit. But in the longer term, once the kind of systems are a little bit kind of imbalanced, for example, it means that so cortisol can also have kind of an inflammatory effect, so it can also heighten, so for example eczema can get worse, kind of like inflammatory skin conditions, and can kind of affect symptoms in that way. So it's again, it's kind of a balance thing, but it just depends on kind of how long the symptoms are lasting. But I think there's also, so that's a very physical side of it, but then how stress can also affect you, I guess, is if you're stressed or tired or struggling with things, I guess behaviourally we can also kind of fall back into kind of old habits, or seeking kind of energy boosts from maybe unhealthy snacks, sugar, etc. So we might find ourselves actually kind of going into slightly behaviours that we would maybe deem as kind of less healthy than ones that we would maybe do when we were kind of feeling good. So it's kind of like a two-pronged attack in a way. So it has the physical effects, but then also kind of the behaviours and I guess emotions and how we think as well. Everything kind of is impacted in a way.
So we've just come out of the interview with Dr. Katrin Hulme, and it was really, really interesting to hear more about her work, the Compass project that she's doing, but also just having the reassurance that stress is actually a natural thing, and it's normal to sometimes get it and to feel that way, but it's also important to kind of recognise the signs and knowing what support you can get to help manage it. So make sure to put your comments and share your experiences of how you manage your condition, and if you want to continue following those videos, like and subscribe to MS Reporters.